There we go. Okay, so this is week 5, marketing and publicity, the final week of the 5-week sessions. Thanks for coming along for the ride, the journey, for everybody that came to all 5 weeks. So at this point, you've written a true crime piece, article, hopefully a book. And now you have this book and you have to tell the world about it. So how does marketing and publicity work with the publisher? How does it work with your editor and agent? That's what we'll talk about tonight. And how do you begin if you don't have any experience with marketing or publicity? And unfortunately, I'd say as a working writer, it does tend to be about 40% of your daily workload after a while, engaging on social media, things like that. And then around the time of the publication, I imagine it probably switches around to 60% marketing and publicity and 40% actually continuing to write and work creatively. But if you want to be successful, it's a very important part of the whole process, unless you're in the top 0.001% that make millions a year and have a team to do this sort of thing. You're probably going to be doing it on your own or with help, hopefully, from the publisher. So let me tell you a story right off. And this, I got some very good advice from my first publisher when we were about to go out with the Amy Mihalovic book way back in 2006. And he, because I didn't have any experience with marketing and publicity at that point, and I was curious to how it worked. And what he told me is something I still think about, and that's for a reader to buy your book, or for somebody to really buy anything, purchase anything, they have to come across it to see it in ads or see it however they encounter it. They have to see it 7 times on average before they commit to spending the money to actually purchase it or to get it for themselves. So how do you get that book out in front of them 7 different ways, 7 different times? What we did regionally for Amy Mihalovic was they put me on a lot of radio shows out here, a lot of local radio, local TV. And if somebody was listening to the radio on the way home, they'd hear me, and then maybe the next day they'd see me on a local TV talking about this true crime case. And that's 2 times, and hopefully somebody will mention it to them. And you just got to hope over the course of a month or 2 that they're going to encounter the story of your book somehow that many times. So it's really daunting. Of course, not everybody's like that. If they're a true crime fan and this is something they've been waiting for, they'll go for it pretty quickly. But I always keep that piece of advice in the back of my head. How do you reach somebody 7 times about what you're doing? Now, hopefully you found a good publisher to work with for your first book. The publisher does have some responsibility to promote that book, and some of that is going to be in your contract that you work out through your agent and lawyer, if you have one, and your editor. You'll work on that contract, and sometimes you'll negotiate what they will do with marketing. Sometimes not, but the publisher should want to promote the book and should have some sort of responsibility to do so. So give me just a sec. Oh, sorry. Kyle, I was picking up your audio. Just make sure you're muted for now. And I'll take breaks and, for questions if you have any questions. So here's some things that your publisher should be doing for your book in order to support your book. Some of these are very basic things that every publisher will do. So, and as we go, they'll get more and more unique. So every publisher should create advanced copies of your book. These copies will be available 4 to 6 months before publication. And what they'll do with some of these advanced copies is they will send them to the trades, and that's Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, Kirkus, and a couple others, but those are the three big ones. These are trade magazines and websites that are viewed by libraries and by book buyers at places like Barnes and Noble, the chain bookstores, but also the independent bookstores will be keeping track of these too. And these trade journals are going to be reviewing books that don't come out to the public for another 3 months or so. The reason being is the book buyers have to know about them in order to figure out which books they want to order copies of in time for them to have those copies on the day of the release. So a lot of bookstores, if you want your books in bookstores, a lot hinges on these early reviews that happen from these advanced copies that go out to trades. And what you're hoping for with these trade journals is a starred review. And and that's very easy for the book buyers to kind of look through the magazine and see those little stars, and they'll know that somebody with the people that review for those trade journals are generally anonymous. A lot of times they're anonymous because they have connections to the industry. They know what they're talking about. They've worked in the business long enough to know what a good book is. So we can trust them to know when to put a star, and they know that this book should be more successful than the average book. So you're hoping for a starred review. Doesn't mean your book's not going to do well if you don't get one, but it certainly helps early on. Libraries and, like I said, libraries and bookstores are paying attention to this. And sometimes if you get a really good review in those trades, they'll boost the initial printing for a book, or it could even trigger a second printing even before the book is published. So what we're building towards with marketing at that stage is trying to reach a critical mass. You're trying to get a conversation going online and also behind the scenes with the book buyers, some chatter where people are talking about this book. Behind the scenes, they're saying, hey, did you see this book that's coming out in 3 months? This looks a little different than what we're used to. I think this is going to be something. And once people are talking behind the scenes, it kind of gets the excitement going. And it's a lot of the books that are successful are already successful before publication. The publisher is also providing some advanced copies to reviewers in print, but more and more reviewers online that have popular TikToks or blogs or websites devoted to book reviews. Everybody's hoping for a review in the Times, a favorable review. And most of the times, if there's a review at that level, it will be mostly favorable. The really awful reviews are few and far between, because they should be looking, especially with debut authors, it's kind of mean to attack a debut author for a very terrible book and kind of kill their career right there. Everybody's in the business of promoting good writing. And so most of those reviews will be positive. So you're hoping that one of the reviewers at the Times likes your book from this early copy that they're given, and they get stacks every week. So, how do you get attention there? Sometimes it's just a luck of the draw. A lot of times it's who you know and who your editor knows, and do they know this reviewer personally? If they live in Manhattan, if they have an office in Union Square, most likely they do. Most likely they've bumped into them at a party or something. So that book will come across their desk and they'll know, oh, I know the editor for this book. She's really interesting. So I'm going to take a look at this. So it's all about relationships, just like anywhere else. If you don't get a review in the Times, it's not gonna be the end of your book. It just means you have to work a little harder. The publisher will also be providing digital copies mostly through a service called NetGalley that some of you may be familiar with. If you are a professional reviewer, you can check out advanced copies on NetGalley, and you apply for them, and the marketing department at the publisher will look to see that you're a legit reviewer and then provide you with a free copy in exchange for a fair review. Let me see this question real quick. For the first printing for true crime, any feel as to what the typical minimum amount of books printed? That's a very good question. What should you expect for the first printing of a debut book? I would say, remember, a book is considered successful if it sells more than 5,000 copies, not in a week, but in its lifetime. Most books don't reach that 5,000 limit. 5,000 in a week would be spectacular. In fact, if you time it right, selling 5,000 copies in a week could get you on a bestseller list just from sales. So, how many copies should your publisher be printing? I will just share you some numbers that I know. For The Man from Primrose Lane, my first novel, it had a really decent advance. It had interest from the publisher, and they printed 8,000 for the first printing. And I think that's somewhere around average. It could be more like 5 starting out, especially if you're a debut author, you're untested. I think it was the larger advance that kicked them up to 8,000. Now, still, that was when my agent heard about that. It kind of took the wind out of her sails, I remember, because she was expecting a much larger printing because of the large advance. And another thing that a large printing will do, when you get up to tens of thousands of copies on that first printing, people will take notice. People in the industry, book buyers, the reviewers, word will get around that they're doing a big printing, and that puts confidence into the system, and they'll know that, oh my gosh, well, they're really confident that this is going to be a good book. So sometimes it's the tail wagging the dog, right? And just because they seem to think that it's going to be a bestseller sometimes makes it a bestseller. It's all smoke and mirrors at that point to some extent. So, like I said, they'll be giving advanced copies of your book through NetGalley, digital copies, and these reviewers will provide early reviews on places like Goodreads and their websites and social media. And so a couple months before the book is out, it's already kind of creating a buzz. It's already generating, let's say, 4 or 5 stars average on Goodreads. So people that are really voracious readers will go through and they'll see, oh my gosh, that book doesn't even come out for another 2 months and it's already doing so well. I'm going to have to check that box. So I'll get a message when it's published and I'll know I can buy it right away. So you're generating this interest early on, and it all starts months before publication. if you wait until publication, it's mostly over. I learned that the hard way. We'll get to that story in a minute. The publisher may also, but they're not obligated to, unless it's spelled out in the contract, they might put together a book tour for you. Or they'll throw a little party for the book launch at an independent bookstore, or arrange some library visits for you, or in rare cases, advertising. But the book tours are more and more rare. They don't see a huge need for them. Authors tend to like them because it's kind of this romantic idea, right, that we've always had of a writer on a book tour, but it doesn't really happen that often anymore. There's just not, people aren't motivated to go out and sit in a bookstore and listen to an author that they've never heard of before, or somebody that they, that is just starting out, that isn't that famous. It's hard to get people to get out of their house these days. I mean, look at the malls, look at the libraries. So those are fewer and further between. But one thing you should prepare is, I would, especially if you've written a true crime book, have a library talk ready to go. And put it together in a PowerPoint if you can, with some nice visuals, but be able to talk about that case in a narrative way, in like a 45-minute to an hour talk, because the publisher may want to reach out to libraries near you or near where the case happened if you're writing about a case from another state. And those libraries, they have so much funding every year that they're constantly bringing in authors, and for me, it's been a really kind of decent side business. I do, especially in the fall, I tend to do as many as 10 library talks, and I have 45-minute or hour-long presentations on Amy and Moore Murray and a couple of the other books. And for those library talks, you would ask for, and a lot of times you don't have to ask, the library knows how this works, so they'll offer this to you. But you should be getting between $200 and $300 as what they call an honorarium, $200 to $300 for your time, and then they will allow you to sell books after your talk. You'll do a Q&A, and then you'll sit around or afterwards for anybody that wants to buy the books. And for that, you should totally learn and understand how something like Square works, the app. And if you sign up for Square, they'll send you a free little reader for credit cards, and you link it to your bank account, and it's all pretty easy once you get the hang of it. And that way people can pay with credit card, or however, at the event. So there's library talks that'll help promote your book before and after. Your publisher will also, and when I say publisher, I mean their marketing and publicity team. They will also be handling giveaways on Goodreads and other places, but Goodreads is the biggest place. And if you're not already part of Goodreads, you should sign up tomorrow and just get a hang of how that works, because once you become a published author, you'll have a nice little published authors page, and you'll have a profile and where you can log in, and it gives you some really cool stats right away as far as how many people are reading your book, how many copies have sold, and it keeps track of the analytics. So it tells you how popular your book is at any given time. So they will handle, their team should handle those Goodreads giveaways, and that'll happen, I think, about 2 or 3 months before publication too, or maybe closer to publication. But ultimately, your publisher can only do so much. Your publisher, even if you're with a major publisher and not like a small imprint or smaller publisher somewhere, if you're in with Holt or Simon Schuster, FS&G, Penguin, Random House, the big names. Even if you're at that level, you got to keep in mind that their business is all about mitigating risk. And especially those big publishers will have maybe a dozen to 20 books that come out that month. And you're one of a dozen. Let's say you're one of a dozen. You're also, as a debut author, the most unproven. So their marketing and publicity people only have a certain amount of time to do what they need to do for all of those books. And so their time, in their minds anyway, are better spent with established authors that they know it's going to be easier for them to convince reviewers to review and people to like. You're the unproven part of that. So it's high risk for them to spend much time on you, which is sad, because how do you make more best-selling writers? You need to grow debut authors, and it just kind of gets lost in it, because everybody's, as everybody is short on staff right now, especially in the publishing industry. So just keep that in mind. So the publisher can only do so much, and they may end up doing very little for you, especially for your first book. Now, that is, by the way, one, and I've talked about how I don't particularly like or recommend large advances, because you have to sell out that advance in order to be very marketable for your next book, because the publishers, the first thing they're going to look at is, well, did he sell out his last advance? And if you have too high of an advance, it could really hurt you. So, but the one way in which a really high advance helps is in this part of the equation, because if this publisher has already spent a lot of money on you, they want to recoup that money. So the higher the advance, the more they're going to push that marketing and publicity team to pay attention to you and to push that book and make it a bestseller. So that might be one reason to take the higher advance if you can. But a lot of this is going to fall on your shoulders. And here's what you should be doing. Here's what I would recommend. Everything starts about 9 months out, 9 months to a year from publication. The first thing you're going to do is solicit blurbs. And this is all about who you know. And you should know, hopefully, a handful of other writers. You should make a point to get to meet them if you can, through conventions or through promoting their book on social media, saying something nice about it on TikTok or Twitter, and getting them to follow you that way, because eventually your publisher is going to ask you for blurbs. And what those are other authors saying good things about your book that they can then put on the cover of your book, usually the back cover, that they can get early enough to put it in those advanced copies to get people excited about it. So things like, this is the best thriller I've read all year, or, this writer really knows what they're doing as far as research, but, worded better, of course. And so and you have to, as a working writer, especially if you're going to write multiple books, you should be aware of how this works. And it's kind of a scratch your back, I'll scratch yours type of thing. Can everybody, I guess there's a question. Can everybody hear me okay? Can anybody not hear me? I think so. Okay, good. Great. Where was I? So, oh yes, people will constantly solicit authors for blurbs. And once you become published, people will come to you and say, hey, can you write me a blurb for this next book? And you should do as many of those as you can as a favor, but also you're making relationships there. What I do is, people constantly send me, and these usually come from the editors. that are editing these books, but some come directly from the writers, and they'll say, hey, can you write a blurb for this book? 9 times out of 10, I will. The only times I won't is if, on the rare occasion that it's just terrible, and you don't want your name associated with that book. There was one came in just a couple weeks ago, and it was a weird amalgamation of true crime and fiction. Now, I love the idea that they had. I love it as a novel, and I'd love it as pure nonfiction. But what they did was they took a real true crime case and kind of wondered and presented what they believed happened. And I don't like how that kind of blurs the line. You should do one or the other. And you can do great creative nonfiction and have it read like a novel. But again, it has to be 100% accurate, or at least nobody's going to be 100% as close as you can. You're not making anything up. So I passed on that, but 9 times out of 10, I'll write a blurb. And actually, that's how I got my latest publisher, that is now the publisher of my next 3 books. She came to me and asked me to write a blurb for a book about do you remember that case with the woman in the elevator in California, whose body was found in the water tower above the hotel? And people thought she kind of looked possessed. But I really liked the book. It was a great book. And I wrote a nice blurb for it. And that gave me kind of a relationship with the editor. And so when I had this new book that's coming out in June about the Lisa Pruitt case, and we were looking for publishers and editors, I remembered her, and I thought, hey, let's send the book to her too. And she became my new editor. So you're doing favors, but it's going to help you out in the long run too. It's kind of a pay it forward type of thing. So that's how blurbs work. Also, you should have about 9 months out before publication, if you don't already, is a professional website. And if you can't, yes, it's on the Elisa Lam case. There is a book. I have it around here somewhere. I think the author's last name is Anderson, but yeah, look it up. It's really good. So this website, if you don't have enough money to pay somebody to create a professional looking website for you, it's actually not that hard to do on your own. And I taught myself and how to put it all together. I recommend WordPress. You can get any sort of URL. I have jamesrenner.com. And so you've got that landing site, you've got the website, then you build a page that parks on that website. And I use the WordPress templates, and it's free, unless you want to go crazy with it, but the free versions always worked for me, and it's easy to edit. And there are YouTube tutorials to walk you through the whole process. And a couple hours and you'll have a really nice looking website for people to find you. And you can keep it very simple. Here's a page for the book. Here's a biography on who I am and what I do. And here's how to contact me or how to contact my agent. But you want that website already prior to publication. And by that time, you're probably going to have you'll probably have a version of the cover that you can put up on your website, and high res, big as it can be for people to see. And you're going to be sharing that on social media too. And let's talk about social media real quick, because it's a big part of publicity for your book. You should have a social media presence. I wish it wasn't so. I think social media is one of those inventions that we should like uninvent, like the atomic bomb or something, but it's a necessary evil at this point. And so you should have a presence on all the major social media platforms. And I'm talking about Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Reddit. And let's go over each one and how you can use them and what I typically use them for, because each one serves a slightly different purpose. Twitter, it's very good for regular engagement. You can, a lot of times, the really successful people on Twitter who are authors, they almost like post stream of consciousness things, where they have a thought, they tweet it out real quick, and people just get to know them that way. They're sharing their thoughts and ideas, and you try to make it germane to publishing or true crime, but you don't have to. It's just a way for people to get to know you. Twitter is something that takes 2 seconds, and you can update several times a day and nobody gets annoyed about it. Another way that you should be using Twitter is to follow other writers and editors and reviewers and people in the business, because they'll see that follow. They'll at least take a moment most times to look at who you are, and maybe they see you're a debut author, and the reviewer will sometimes follow you back, and then you've got the connection over DM if you want it. Hang on. Oh, let me jump to Alexa's question here. Over the years, I've created all these accounts for personal use. Would it be beneficial to create new accounts that are more professional? Honestly, I don't think so. I would keep the personal account. The personal connection is what I think engages with people. And it's a little tricky with true crime, and I kind of go back and forth. You can get too personal. I don't post as much about my kids as I used to, but on Instagram, I still occasionally share pictures of my family, but I used to share them, across the board. And, with true crime, you get kind of creepy people and stalkers. And so you got to pull back a little bit and figure out what the balance is. But I would try to keep it personal as much as possible. Back to Twitter real quick. You're following writers and editors. One of the things that Twitter does is, of course, your feed. The other accounts you're seeing are mostly accounts that you personally follow. And if you can make those connections with other people in the industry, the writers and editors and reviewers, and eventually you'll get some of them to follow you back. And then you'll end up on the suggested tab for the rest of them that say, hey, you follow these people, maybe you should be following, James Renner too. And what that does is eventually it parks you inside the echo chamber that you want to be in, which is the publishing echo chamber, in which everybody thinks they're kind of a big deal, because they think that that's the world, and you kind of lose the perspective that everybody else outside of that echo chamber still doesn't really know who you are. But the people that are making those decisions and buying the books and doing the reviews, they'll know you by then. Facebook, I found, is very good for building a loyal fan base. The average the average reader of true crime happens to be women of a certain age, and they are also one of the the biggest demographics. Did I put that right, Val? I think respectfully, I've seen the polls. So, but they're also a big presence on Facebook, and so it just works very well. They're the ones that are engaging in Facebook, and they happen to be the same demographic as most of your readers are going to be. So I found it very helpful to build a fan base through Facebook. With Facebook, it's different from Twitter, because if you're posting every 10 minutes or every half hour, people get annoyed with that, and they're not seeing it all because of the way the feed works. So on Facebook, I only update once a day, or maybe once every other day. You don't have to be so constant with Facebook. You should also be using Facebook to join pages of other authors, follow and like what they're doing, if in fact that you like what they're doing, and build it that way. Instagram is a place that's really good for showing your human side. You know, it's showing you as a real person. So you're sharing pictures of you out on your adventures, where you're going to interview somebody, or a new cover of your book, or your travels to bookstores, your visits to everything you're doing with this book, where you're meeting people like independent bookstores or libraries. You're taking a photo there. Make sure you take a photo and then you upload it on Instagram. You tag those places, and they'll take notice of that and like you for taking the time to mention them. And so Instagram's kind of a fun one. TikTok it gets bigger and bigger every month. It's the best algorithm for what you want to do and for getting your book out there. It's because it's open, and Facebook, the algorithm is, and Twitter to some extent, the algorithm is clamped by the capitalist drive to make money. So it will pick up on the fact that you're trying to promote a book, and it will try to sell you a boost or a better way to engage, because it wants you to spend $20 to reach 1,000 more people. It's not going to just, it could just give your feed to those 1,000 people, but then it wouldn't make any money. TikTok's a little different because it's run by communist China. And for that reason, I'm not exactly sure that it's going to be around forever, but the algorithm is essentially free. And what it's promoting is an addiction to the app itself. And you can tap into that. And you're going to post content about your book. If it's a true crime, say if it's a true crime case, a murder, you can post 30-second snippets of, here's a new fact in the case, here's a new clue I found, did you know this about the case? Or just simply walk through the very basic facts of the case in 10 different videos. And using those hashtags on TikTok is very important. You're going to find out what hashtags are trending with true crime, put those in there, and people that are interested in your topic will find it. It will push it to those people because it wants those people never to put down TikTok. So it's pretty wild. So I would check that out. It's also very fickle. So your content has to be constant and engaging and good. And if it's not, then it goes to the bottom of the bin pretty quickly. Goodreads is essential. If you're not on Goodreads already, you should be. That's something you should be in, tomorrow. It's the very best way to meet voracious readers. People that read 10 books a month are going to be hunting for new content and they're going to be looking for Goodreads for that content. Very important here on Goodreads to keep track of people who are reviewing your book. And if you tend to make this if you want to make this a career and have multiple books, you're going to want to go to your last book page on Goodreads and look to see whose reviews are the most popular. Some of the reviewers have fans. Some of the reviewers have, when they post a review, 1,000 people will read it because they love that reviewer, because they're so well at articulating what's good about the book, and they use these visuals and GIFs, and it's just really fun to read. And so if you can find a handful of them, they are invaluable, and you'll want to reach out and make friends with them, because on your next book, you're going to give them one of those digital copies of your book for free, so that they like your stuff already. They're going to read it 2 or 3 months before the public does, and they're going to put up this wonderful review on Goodreads for it, and that's going to be the first thing that somebody finds when they're searching and wondering what your book's about. They're going to be like, let me see if this is any good. You already know that there's this wonderful review for it. So Goodreads is wonderful for that. On one little caveat on Goodreads that definitely keep this in mind. The way I explained it is a good way to engage with these reviewers. What you don't want to do is just have like a cut and paste thing about your book that you spam 100 reviewers with, because they will pick up on that really quickly, and after like a couple strikes, you will lose your page. So don't spam people. Try to make legitimate connections with a couple of these top reviewers. And finally, Reddit. If you're not on Reddit, you should understand what it is. I would suggest a YouTube tutorial, just a real quick understanding of how to use Reddit and how it works. Find a couple subreddits. The ones for true crime that are really decent are Unresolved Mysteries, the Unresolved Mysteries sub. And I don't know, the other ones are kind of, the Unresolved Mysteries has good moderation. The other ones, it's hit or miss, but there's an Unresolved Mystery for just true crime podcasts, really any flavor. And you got to be real careful with, they don't allow self-promotion on a lot of these subs, but again, you're also commenting on other people's on these cases in true crime, and you're making a name for yourself out there. I use my real name on Reddit. A lot of people try to go completely anonymous on Reddit, but I don't see how that benefits you as a writer. And, so I use my real name, always have. Why you can't do self-promotion on Reddit, there's one exception that's very helpful for a book, I found, is an AMA, which stands for Ask Me Anything. And if you reach out to the mods and the moderators and you're nice about it, and you have a book with a traditional publisher, they could allow you to do an AMA on the date of the release. And so that morning there'll be a post for everybody that says, hey, author, James Renner of this book is going to appear for an AMA at 10 a.m. Feel free to jump in, ask him any questions you want. And that's a fun way to engage with your reader, especially if you're covering a case that has been mentioned on those subreddits that people are paying attention to. They're going to really want to know the scoop and what you found out. So let's jump to 6 months before publication. This is when you're beginning to push pre-sales. You're getting that cover that you already have out on social media, so people are familiar with it. They're getting to recognize it. And you're asking people to, hey, if you like this, if you think you might be interested, order it today. And as a pre-sale, that way you have it the moment of its release. You'll get it before anybody else, because those pre-sales all count towards your first week of sales. And this is all about driving up the very first week of sales for your book, because if we don't know exactly what the threshold is for making a bestseller, but if you time it right, it could be somewhere around 5,000 copies. If you time it exactly right, it could be a little fewer. If you hit it on an off week, and you only need to hit that bestseller list once, and then forever after that, you get to use that little tag on all your books. So this is all about driving up the pre-sales for your books. Now we're about 3 months out, and here's something. This is interesting timing, because I wasn't aware that too many other people did this. But here's what I like to do about 3 months out. I make postcards of my books. And actually, I think I have one. Do we have one up here? I don't. But I make postcards of my books. And on the front of the postcard is the cover. And on the back, it leaves me room to write. And I send those postcards out to people and that I've met, and every bookstore, specifically employees that I've met at bookstores, but independent bookstores, book buyers and booksellers at Barnes and Noble, and I'll send it out to them 3 months before and just say, hey, thanks for helping me with the last book. I think you might find this interesting. It comes out June 27th. And you're not even specifically saying, please buy this new book, but it's for them to see this, and they'll make the connection themselves and think, oh yeah, he was a cool guy. He came in, he signed some copies, we'll order 3 books or 5 or a case of them, because at that point they're buying the books for the future, the 3 months into the future. So that's about the right timing for that, 3 months before you're sending out postcards. Coincidentally, I got this today in the mail. I checked my post office box, and it's a postcard that somebody made for their true crime book, with a little bit about the book on the back. So other people are doing this, and it's very effective. And you can make 100 postcards for I don't know, like $20 or something. So it's low risk, high reward. You're also reaching out to everybody that likes you. So don't be afraid to post on your family Facebook page, your personal profile, and say, hey, guys, I wrote this book. It'd be super cool if you bought a copy. If you don't like it, use it to make that wobbly table steady, or give it to somebody that does. But it helps, and feel free to share with them that all these pre-sales help me out with that first week, which is what makes or breaks an author. Go through your emails, look at the people that have contacted you in the last year or two, or that have reached out to you, any sort of connection. Yeah, because if you want to do this for a living, it's all about that first week. So, and if this is your first book, one really important thing that you need to do is every time you meet somebody in this business, especially at bookstores and book buyers, you're writing down their name. In libraries, you're writing down their name and where you met them and where they work. And that way, for your next book, you have that list already, and you just go to the list, and that's who gets the postcards, that's who gets the contacts. So start keeping that Rolodex there. Now, if all else fails, there's one more thing you can do, and it's kind of the ugly side of the whole business, but there's people that make a lot of money doing it, and that's you have the option of hiring a publicist. And I'll tell you a couple stories about this. So on my first book, Primrose Lane, the novel that came out in 2012, it was my first big book, and about 3 months before publication, I realized that my books weren't getting into the bookstores. I had assumed I was with a publisher that would get the books in every bookstore in the country. And I started realizing things about the industry. And one of the things I realized was that those tables where you walk into Barnes and Noble, the tables out front that are full of all the cool new books, were not constructed by the people that worked at the bookstore, but they were real estate that was bought up by publishers, and they would pay Barnes and Noble a certain amount to have their books displayed. And so I realized it's not a fair playing field. Now, to Barnes and Noble's credit, they did change that policy in the last year, and they have much more control on a store by store basis. So, but it can be like that to some extent. Everybody's trying to game the system a little bit, and I realized my book wasn't being talked about. It wasn't being talked about online. It wasn't getting any sort of buzz. Bookstores weren't committing to it. And I was freaking out, because if that book wouldn't have worked, I understood that would be the end of my career. At that level, I'd never get another book published. So I went to my agent, and I'm like, what what in the world can I do? And she said, well, you could hire a publicist. And she got me in touch with a couple, and I interviewed them over the phone. I think I interviewed 3 companies. And I ended up going with the company just across the Hudson in New Jersey. I'm trying to remember the name. I think it might have been Wonderkind, something similar to that. But I spoke with their publicist. They told me their game plan, and what they could do was they could get the book in the hands of more reviewers, but also what they could do that the publisher couldn't do so well was get the books in the hands of some social influencers, some people that really weren't connected to the publishing world, but were super popular on social media that could talk about the book. And if they have 50,000 followers, they're like, hey, this book is kind of cool. And they also offered some ideas that I wasn't hearing from the publisher that I really liked. They suggested that I give, along with the book, that I give a gift to a couple reviewers for very popular blogs at the time. This was 2012, and blogs were still pretty cool. And now, when I say gifts, it doesn't mean like some sort of fancy thing, like a watch or a car or anything cool like that. Just something to stand out that they could keep. So what I did was, my father-in-law is a pack rat, and he had I've never seen this before, but he had a recordable 8-track player and a bunch of blank 8-tracks. And so I recorded myself reading the first couple chapters of Primrose Lane onto 8-tracks. And if you're too young, 8-track is this bulky thing that they used to play music on in the late 70s that only lasted for a few years. And so I had an audiobook, and I put the little cover of my book on the 8-track, kind of made it look weathered. And I made 5 of these. 5 of these Man from Primrose Lane 8-tracks. Now, I was giving them away and knew that they didn't have any way to play those. So I went to flea markets and secondhand stores around the Akron area, and I tracked down 5 workable 8-track players that cost me like, $10 a piece. So I shipped out to 5 reviewers an 8-track player and my audiobook on 8-track, and asked them to review the book. And one of them was the guy that runs this website called Boing Boing, which was really hip at the time. I still read it, and it's pretty popular. And he was so astounded by this weird thing that I sent him that he made a whole post about it. And he brought out the 8-track, hooked it up, and played it, and it worked, and that got the book some attention. So a gift means something strange that they would remember you by. So now with that's the only time I've used a publicist, and I don't necessarily intend to use them again, but it certainly helped for my first book. They are quite expensive. Now, sharing these numbers with you, the advance on that first book was about $50,000, and I spent $10,000 on the publicist, thinking that this was an investment in my future, that this is going to give me the career that I wanted, and hopefully assure that I will have more books to publish in the future. So I took a gamble, and it definitely helped. So make sure if you're thinking about a publicist, if you're interviewing them, one of the big things you need to know is who are the clients they worked with before. If you haven't heard of any of them, go to another publicist. But if you do know that they have a good track record, you know they have those connections, you know it'll be worth it. And that's all negotiable too. They'll give you a price, and these you negotiate that down. You know, your counter is like maybe 3/4 of what they're asking. So it's kind of a dirty part of the business. Now, if you can't afford a publicist, it's very important that you're thinking outside the box for other ideas, how to make your book stand out, how to get your book noticed. Now, John Grisham, another thing I did with Primrose was a stock signing tour. And I'll explain that in a second, but it's kind of what John Grisham did to get started. Grisham would drive around, this before he became super famous. He'd drive around with copies of his book in the trunk of his car, and he would drive around to bookstores around the South and say, hey, you should be carrying this book. And then he'd give them copies to sell, and have every opportunity to push that book. He was like a Bible salesman, but it was his book out there. And eventually his book got so many places in the South, people remembered the name, and he was a good writer too, so that helped. And so he's out there hustling, and sometimes that's what you need to do. So with Primrose, the publicist helped. We were starting to get noticed, but my book was still not getting in enough places. The the week that it was published, I called up bookstores around the country. And like, I called up a bookstore in Alaska. I'm like, how many copies of Primrose Lane do you have? And they're like, what? I don't know what that book is. And I'd call up like Chicago, and, you know, how many books do you have? And they're, well, we have 2 copies. You know, and if the bookstore had any copies at all, they wouldn't have that many. So I'm like, how do I get my books in the bookstores? And I realized there was only one way I could guarantee that the bookstore would actually carry my book. And that was if they knew I was coming to sign the copies. And so I did something kind of crazy. I called up a bunch of bookstores on the east side of the country. And I said, hey, I'm just calling because I'm going to be passing through town next week. If you have a couple of copies of my book, I'd be happy to sign them. It's called a stock signing. You're not sitting there waiting for people to come in and sign your book. You're just going to the bookstore and signing the books. And they're like, oh, well, we don't have any copies of your book, but if you're coming in, we'll order a couple. And so all the bookstores ordered at least 2 or 3 copies. Some of those bookstores, when they knew that I was coming through, ordered a whole box of the book. So I left my house from Akron, Ohio, and I took a week off. My wife gave me a week, and I drove from Akron east to Boston, down through Jacksonville, Florida, over to New Orleans, up through the middle part of the country, through Indianapolis, and then back home through Akron. I visited 55 bookstores in 7 days and signed all the copies that they had. And to this day, if you go to Amazon, the analytics there, they're like Nielsen ratings to show where my copies, where my books are being sold. You can still see that path. That's where my fans are. My second book, I've kind of made a tradition of this now. My second book, I did Seattle all the way down to San Diego, down the West Coast, and visited, I think that was like 35 bookstores, signing copies there. So, and I think with the publicist and doing that stock signing is what saved the book, because we started getting the numbers a week or 2 after publication. And even my editor at the time, she's like, well, I don't know what did it, but something saved your book. And I don't think I told her that I was visiting so many of those bookstores. And while I was driving, by the way, I ordered giant, you can go online and you can order these giant magnets that stick to the side of your car, like the size of one of your doors. And so I ordered this giant magnet that said, who is the man from Primrose Lane? And with the website on it. And so as I'm driving, I'm this driving billboard, and maybe a handful of people were like, what the hell's that? And Googled it and got a book that way. So do whatever you can to save, to make your career, to get those books in the bookstores. And I don't think there's anything wrong with any of that, because you're not selling, you're not pushing these books onto people that don't want them. You're just giving the opportunity for people to find your book. You're giving people the opportunity to see it and to decide for themselves. But you got to get the books in the bookstore somehow. So after publication, you're going to promote your book for at least a year until you get tired of it, until people get tired of it. But don't give up for like a year. You're going to be constantly talking about the book. If you get a good review, you're putting it out on social. And you're looking at conventions. Conventions are a great way to meet other people in the industry and to have people talk about your books. And if you're into true crime, there's a really big convention called CrimeCon that happens every year. This year it's in Orlando. And they actually don't have too many book authors there, but you can make it out to CrimeCon, even if you're going out as a visitor, just to meet other people in the industry. But or you could do what I did and start a podcast. You could make a podcast about the case that you wrote about, or a podcast in general about true crime, and you can get on what they call Podcast Row at CrimeCon. So it gets you in the building and in front of these people. Oh, cool. Gail was at CrimeCon in Vegas. Those are always fun. Did you make these trips? Alexis had a question. Did you make these trips in rental cars? I did not. And the first time I did not. But that's a very good idea, because I definitely wore out the engine in my Vibe. By driving that many miles on the car. I should have taken a rental car. The second time I did, when I did the West Coast. And this is so long ago that they gave me an issue with that. Nowadays, the rental car companies don't care if you take your car from one city and turn it into another city. But it was a big deal, I remember, when I picked up the car in Seattle, and they're like, okay, when are you going to return it? I said, well, I'm going to return it in a week, but it's going to be in San Diego. And they're like, what? So it took some convincing, but I don't think that's such a problem. There is a CrimeCon in London too. Yes, there is. In fact, I will be there this year. It'll be in, so Sylvia, if you're going to come to London, you got to say hi. I'll be there in June. There's also, if you're into writing fiction, crime. Oh, cool. Sylvia and I get to hang out. So if you're into fiction thrillers, there's what's called BoucherCon is the big one for that. So check into all those as well. But that's it. That's pretty much it for marketing and publicity. It's all about there's a bunch of people promoting their books. So you got to figure out a way to do something a little more unique, whether it's these stock signings or weird things like 8-track tapes. You got to figure out a way to stick out a little bit. But happy to answer any questions you might have. Not just about marketing and publicity, but this is the last class. So if you have questions about anything, raise your hand or ask away in the comments. Amanda's asking you, I mentioned that I published locally. How did that work? It was a very good start. It was a good way to get into the industry, because if you go to a major publisher out of, that publishes nationally, it's hard for them to, again, it's mitigating risk. And if you don't have any sort of track record, they're like, why would you jump directly into the major leagues And so the regional publisher, he's a very, just really cool guy. And it was a great way to get a start. It's somebody I could drive to his office and go through the edits. And if you can start, if I think starting regionally is a good idea sometimes. So I that was the way I was able to get into the field and for people to take me seriously. Did I have an agent at that time? I did not have an agent until I published at a national level. And so if you go regional, you probably don't need an agent. It's probably easier to deal with them one-on-one. At that point, they're probably only publishing a book a month as well, if that. So they're going to give you a lot more attention. Oh, Jane will be at BoucherCon. I've never been there. Have you been to BoucherCon before, Jane? Can you unmute?
Yes, I have.
What's it like?
I was there. I was in Minneapolis last year, and then in 2012, our Sisters in Crime group were the ones that brought it to Cleveland.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, some of the most famous, Michael Conley, C.J. Box, a lot of the really well-known authors are there.
Did you have a table? Could they give you a table?
Well, they generally have a bookstore that or a couple of bookstores that sign or that bring their books in, and then you can sign.
Okay.
And have a table to sign.
That's great. Where's it at this year?
San Diego.
Okay.
Yeah,
I got to make it out to one of those. That sounds fun.
Oh yeah, I think you'd like it. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. How many books do you have to sell for a bestseller in the United States? It really depends on the timing of it. I think, like I said, if your timing's just right, it could be, as little as 4,000 to 5,000 copies, which is still, it's still quite a bit, but it's not like, tens of thousands of copies. That's what I've been told anyways. Any other last questions? All right. Well, if there's anything else, if any other questions come up, or if you get to a point where you've got your manuscript and you're reaching out to agents and you need any other suggestions or advice, feel free to reach out to me over email. Thank you so much for being a part of these classes. And I had a lot of fun. This went a lot easier than I thought it would. So I hope you got something out of it, and I hope to read your works at some point. I hope you're all published one day, and if you are, please let me know, and I'll be the first to pre-order. And if you ever need a blurb, let me know. All right, see you guys.